Hello, class, and congratulations on being done Chapter 5. We are now going to start Chapter 6. And Chapter 6 says, Chapter 6, Section 1 is about ratios and proportions. So I would really like you to have a good understanding of what a ratio is and what a proportion is and be able to solve them when we're done this video. What is a ratio? A ratio really means fraction. That's what a ratio is. It is any two numbers that make a fraction. So a relationship between two quantities, normally expressed as the quotient of one divided by the other. Now, you can write a ratio, instead of writing it as a fraction, we can write it a couple different ways, but the most common way is just to write it as a fraction. So for example, the ratio of A can be written as can be written as this, AB, or A is to B. If I'm comparing the triangles, triangle ABC to triangle DEF, there's a couple things you need to realize. If I'm talking about ABC, when you go look at ABC and you look at DEF, which one's bigger? Hopefully you realize ABC is bigger. If ABC is bigger, then we know the bigger number is going to be on the top of my fraction. Even though it's a 2 and DEF is a 1, and a lot of times when we write fractions, we don't put a 1 in the denominator. You have to do it when you're writing a ratio. If you are comparing something, you're comparing for every 2, I have 1. Whether it's money, it's meters, it's centimeters, you're saying for every 2 meters, it's 1 meter. So the way I could write it is I could write it 2 over 1, 2 to 1, or I can say 2 to 1 with, TO. It's definitely not as common as the other two. Normally in geometry, we tend to just write it as 2 over 1, but 2:1 is absolutely correct when you're talking about ratios. But like I said, if there is a 1 involved, you have to keep the 1 in the denominator, okay? On our next slide, I want you to take a second and just try to simplify them. It's extremely easy if the units are the same. So we're literally saying 64 over 6. Meters can cancel. We're saying 32 over 3. Can't simplify anymore. Or 32 is to 3. Both of these are acceptable. You do not need to write it both ways. I probably would just write, I would probably just leave it as this on my test or quiz. But if that's how you felt you like writing it better, you can. When we come to B, you got to be aware that it's feet and inches, so we can't simplify that without converting into the same units. So because inches is smaller, I'm going to change feet into inches. So the first thing I'm going to do to convert it is change 5 feet times 12 inches, so it's 60 inches over 20 inches, and it's 3 to 1. You do not have to have units in your answer because you're just describing what the ratio is between the two numbers. So 5 feet over 20 inches is just a 3 to 1 ratio. Go ahead and try these two on your own. Pause the video, do them on your own, and then compare your answers to mine. Okay, so yards to yards is very easy. So I get 24 over 3, 8 over 1, or 8 to 1. Like I said, 8 over 1 as the fraction is absolutely fine. When you did number 2, you had to be careful that you have centimeters and meters. Centimeters is smaller, so I'm going to change the larger one to make it smaller. So 6 centimeters, 150 centimeters over 6 meters, 150 over 600, because there's 100 centimeters in a meter, or 1/4, or 1/2/4. Just again, as I said it before, if there's a 1 in the denominator, you must keep it in your final answer. Okay, let's look at a textbook ratio problem. It says the measure of the angles in a triangle are an extended ratio of 1 to 2 to 3. Find the angles. So to picture that as a picture, to draw a picture, because sometimes that really helps us visually, is I'm going to create a triangle. Let's call it CED. And in that triangle, I'm basically saying one of the angles is x, one of them's 2 times x, and the other one's 3 times x. So once you make that picture, it should be very simple for you to solve how to find those angles. So first thing, we know that x plus 2x plus 3x equals 180. Why? The triangle sum theorem. Not that you have to prove it, but just for justification. 6x is 180, x is 30. Now, you're not done. I didn't want the value of x, I wanted each angle. So when I plug it back in, make sure you get, make sure when you plug it back in, you get 30, 60, and then 90. And that's your final answer. The second type of textbook problem that we kind of have is this. You're planning to paint a mural on a rectangular wall. You know that the perimeter of the wall is 484 feet, and the ratio of its length to width is 9 to 2. Find the area of the wall. Okay, there's some extremely important information here. Obviously, the perimeter is 484, so that's completely around the outside. What is more important is that it says its length to width is 9 to 2. So I need to make that relationship, meaning that if I was to label one of them length, let's call this length, and this width, that could be interchangeable. You could call that width if you wanted, and this length, that's fine. But since it says length to width 9 to 2, then you've got to stick the 9 is your length and the width is 2x. So that's how I would label my picture. I would call the length L and the width W, but length is 9x because we don't know what it is, and the width is 2x. So when I talk about perimeter problem, I'm setting you up from the very start. I'm saying the perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. So I set up a formula of 484, which is the perimeter, is 2L plus 2W. And then all I do is substitute in that length is 9x and width is 2x. Biggest mistake, people forget the 2's because it's really 18x and 4x is how we would find the perimeter. And then lastly, that would give us 22x equals 4084, and x is 22. We are not done this problem, though. It asked us to find the area of the wall. So x is 22. So when I go back, I want to find the width. Well, the width is easy. It's 2 times 22, so that's 44. And the length is 9 times 22, which is 198. So that's the length. This is the width. If you can remember how to find area of a rectangle is length times width. So then 44 times 198, and my final answer is 8,712 feet squared. If you are taking feet times feet, that gives you feet squared, okay? Please go to the slide, pause the video for me, please. Try both these problems on your own. You should be able to do them from the past 2 examples, and make sure we know how to do ratio problems. Your answer for perimeter, you should have it's 7x for the length and 5x for the width, because its length to width is 7 to 5. So length is 7, width is 5. I find my answer to be 2. Length then is 7 times 2, which is 14, and the width is 5 times 2, which is 10. It didn't ask for the area, so I'm done. In problem 4, I know that my three angles are 1x, 3x, and 5x. That's 9x. X is 20. I'm not done. Angle 1, which was 1x, 20, 60, and 100. The next slide talks about a proportion, and you've seen proportions before. You've solved them before in algebra, so this shouldn't be too difficult. A proportion is two equal ratios, okay? So my example is if I have 1/2, that's a ratio. Then what number, 5 over what number is equal to 1/2? So you should have realized the answer is 10. Now, if I look at example A, I'm saying 5/10. What does that simplify to? A half. What number over 16 is also a half? 8. So if you can do that, great. That's a proportion. It's two equal ratios. The easiest way that you've learned to solve proportions is by cross multiplying. 5 times 16 equals x times 10. 80 equals 10x, and x is 8. Here, it's much harder to try to do it without cross multiplying. You can't come up really with what y would be to make these equal. So I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to get 1 times 3y equals 2 times a group, so that's a parentheses, so I need to distribute. So it's 3y equals 2y plus 2. I subtract, and y is 2. So go ahead, take a second, pause the video, and try these three on your own, please. I hope you're trying them by yourself so that you can do this on your own. As I pull down, 8 times 2 gives me 16. 5 times x is 5x. When I solve, I get a fraction. I would just leave my answer as a fraction. I did forget to mention, you got your answer in this problem as 2. You can go back and check that your proportion is correct. So when I go back, if y is 2, this is 1/3 over here, because 1, 2 plus 1. This is 2 times 3 times 2, which is 6, which simplifies to 1/3. So that is equal. So you can check. It's harder to check if you have a fraction, but you can. So the next one here, we're going to get 3x equals 4 times the quantity or group of x minus 3. That's 4x minus 12. Some people are still making that mistake, not distributing to the second number. I subtract, I get a negative, and my final answer is positive. 1 over 12 minus 3, 1/9. 4 over 36, which is 1/9. So you can check your answer. 14 times y minus 3 equals 7y. 14 minus 42. I subtract. I get negative 42, negative 7, and y is 6. 6 minus 3, that's 3/7. 6 over 14 simplifies to 3/7. So that's what you need to get out of ratio and proportions. Ratio is a fraction, and you need to be able to solve problems using a ratio. And then we need to be able to remember how to do a proportion. All right, have a good weekend. Be safe.